Today our story begins with the Korean version of Melstroy, who, like all of us, always wanted to become rich. Even though he was the most ordinary guy, he still wanted to earn a lot of money. At that time, he was already 20 years old, and he worked hard to achieve success. But only the army ruined his path to becoming a millionaire, and he left to repay his debt to his homeland.
After his return, he very well celebrated his dismissal from the army, invested all his savings in some nonsense, and successfully lost everything. Apparently, he would become a mask.
There was nowhere to go. After the guy turned 25, he decided to take out a loan and opened his own store. But as a result, the competition turned out to be too strong, and now he is simply crying in front of his now closed store. Even a little boy laughed at his shame. Having come to his senses after such a serious injury, the main character still begins to understand that he is gradually approaching 30 years old, while he is unemployed and has no higher education, and in general he is a complete loser. As he finished his last cigarette, the guy was terribly upset because for the last 10 years, all he had done was work tirelessly, and in the end he had nothing at all and even lost his youth. In the end, he is no different from himself at age 20, except that he is a little older. From all this pain, the guy just starts crying, realizing that his life is most likely wasted. And it was at that moment, when he had already lost all hope for a normal life, that another terrible event happened, because the main character's grandfather dies. The man sat and drank drinks in memory of his father, and said that he lived a happy life. His children also thought that his grandfather had gone to another world, completely rejoicing that he had lived his life. The main character does not have many memories of his grandfather. As a child, he constantly visited and played with him. But as soon as he grew up, he began to do this much less often because his work schedule was too busy. He clearly remembered how when he came to him as a child, his grandfather always took out some goodies from the store, just to please his grandson. The simple-minded and kind face of his grandfather, this is exactly the image that pops up in the guy's head the first time he is mentioned. The father decided to find out what his son was doing now, but his uncle asked not to raise this topic because it's already terribly difficult for the main character, especially after his business went bankrupt. The father, it seems, didn't even know how his son was doing, and simply drank another glass of drink, intending to offer something cool. Since the boy had absolutely nothing to do now, he suggested that the main character take over the old store that his grandfather was looking after. The guy simply could not believe his ears. The reason was completely unknown to him, but for some reason his grandfather loved that store too much. That's why he wanted to keep it. But it would be too difficult for his grandmother to do it alone, and he also has a lot of things to do. He understands perfectly well that young people now don't like to live in villages, but there were simply no other candidates, especially since this store had no competitors because it was the only one in the village, so the revenue there is simply excellent. Sweet and at the same time bitter memories of grandfather and his store, unfortunately, now remain only in the head of the main character. Having gathered his thoughts, he confidently agrees to look after his grandfather's business, thinking that it is there that he will be able to start his life from scratch. Next, we are shown a beautiful girl who was waiting for the boy. It's just been a long time since they saw each other at his father-in-law's funeral, by the way. This is Aunt Choi. She's 35, but she's not his own aunt. She's just his uncle's wife. In response, the boy simply smiled and said hello to his aunt. While he takes over the store and gets used to the new place, he and his uncle agreed that the main character will live here for some time. In words, this is his uncle's house, but in reality, it was his grandfather's. It's just that his uncle lived here since childhood. The girl thought that he was already too tired while getting here, but the main character denied everything. It was his aunt, and he and his uncle had a whole 10 years age difference. She asked if he had time to eat, and he said that he had eaten before leaving. Since he was not hungry, he should quickly follow her and she would show him the room. He will live in this very room. Before, his father-in-law used it as his personal office, but they removed everything here, especially for the boy. In his opinion, everything was pretty good here. The girl appreciated his praise. Apparently they weren't trying in vain. In such cases, let him settle down in a new place, and for now she will take care of dinner. When everything is ready, she will definitely call him to the table. He, in turn, simply fell to the floor and began to think that while he was doing all his work, he had not met any girls at all. As a result, returning to the village was truly a terribly pathetic sight. Well, you could think about how pathetic the main character is for a very long time, and he simply decides to quickly go and see the condition of that store. Meanwhile there, the grandmother was already working hard and unloading boxes. She was so glad to see that her granddaughter returned to this village again. But she couldn't understand the reason why he was here. He simply tells her that he will work in this store from tomorrow, so he came to inspect everything. But he only thought about the fact that after years nothing had changed here at all. His grandmother said that it was always like this here. Nothing ever changes. The main character was confused only by the inscription. The hole was closed. Was it really that grandfather named his store? The boy wanted to help his grandmother carry the boxes. She certainly didn't want him to strain, but he had nothing better to do anyway, so it was better to let him help. Quite a lot of time passed, and the main character unloaded all the boxes and could not believe that his grandmother was going to work here alone. But she told him that his grandfather carried boxes here until his death. Does he really think that his grandmother is worse? She was simply interested in his opinion. Was it worth it? He still had nothing to do even if he returned to the city, and here at least he could try something new. The grandmother said that she was going to continue to look after the store so that it wouldn't be so difficult for him. But the boy didn't understand. If she looked after the store, what would he do then? Now there were more important things to do, and she asked if he had said hello to the headman, of course. He had not yet had time, and the granny asked him to do so. Suddenly, some crazy girl burst into the store and asked the grandmother if they have already brought her drinks, and if so, she urgently needed them. The main character is apparently a naive fool who just said hi to her, but the grandmother immediately started swearing, because a girl can't drink all the time like that. But she somehow didn't care at all about the words of the old grandmother. She would do whatever she wanted, in short, a typical teenage syndrome. Suddenly, she was struck by an electric shock. The girl was too surprised that the man was sitting here. The grandmother said that it was her grandson. And he turns out to be so cheerful for a person who has lost part of his life. He simply tells her that starting tomorrow he will work here, and he is pleased to meet her. So far, the girl has reacted strangely to him, and her grandmother has already brought her a couple of cans of drinks. The grandmother began to talk about how this lady works at a factory and is raising a child alone, so she will constantly come to them for drinks. She, of course, did not like this conversation and asked not to carry such nonsense. After which she decides to turn on Flash's speed in order to escape from here as quickly as possible, and it seems this plan is working quite well. Looking at all this spectacle, the grandmother said that every day she comes and takes 3 cans of beer, so to speak. She teaches the boy to remember regular customers. But the main character couldn't understand why she was so surprised after she saw him. Everything turns out to be too simple. The grandmother told him the secret that there were simply no men in the village. Of course, the boy is surprised by this news and asks about everything, but it seems strange to the grandmother that he still doesn't know about it. After which a long story begins that their village is called Tame. In ancient times, all its inhabitants were taken to war, and the girls were evacuated. And those girls who managed to survive rallied together and created a village here, and since there were no men, they all had to work on their own, sowing fields and building houses. But even after the war ended, by a strange coincidence, only girls were born here. They thought that it was the people, so they began to call people from other villages. But even so, the situation repeated itself. This is how their village is considered a kind of cursed, and that's why it got its name, because of the large number of girls who have accumulated on this land. The main character simply could not believe this story, because then it turns out that his grandmother interrupts him and says that his theory is correct. The only guys in the village were his uncle and his grandfather. And he also thought about the reason why there was so much women's goods here. Now everything became clear, of course. They sold goods for ladies at a higher price. The boy began to worry that the ladies would start asking him to help them cope with difficult things or something like that, but his grandmother told him not to worry, because all these girls who live here were very strong themselves. After which night has already fallen, and it seems that it is time to gather for a family dinner. It turns out that in honor of the fact that our main character arrived, the girl decided to steam the meat, which made him very happy. They asked him if he had already been to the store, and the main character said that it was pretty good there, strange, but everyone was surprised by it. The man was worried that the guy's girlfriend would be against the fact that he so suddenly ran away from her to the village. The boy said that he didn't have a girlfriend, surprisingly, but it was even for the better because they had a lot of beautiful ladies in the village. In response, the main character simply decided to laugh, and then thought about the fact that he was the only guy who was in this village. That is why his uncle had such a unique opportunity. He was able to marry such a beautiful girl. Next, our boy was already in his bed and thinking about the fact that tomorrow life would be waiting for him from scratch. He had to give his all to avoid the mistakes of the past. When suddenly he heard a voice that asked if he was sleeping, of course. The boy immediately answered in the negative. This shot looks as if some ghost is talking to him. His aunt just wanted to know how he was doing in their village. In his opinion, everything was fine. He even thinks that he can fit into this place. She also asked about work, whether he could cope with this, of course, that he could and would do everything in his power for this. She just looked extremely surprised. The main character wanted to understand what happened, but she said that it didn't matter and wished him good night. He was very confused and also wished his aunt good night. What the hell just happened? And here is the expression on the face of a person who just saw a demon, and why the hell did she even come to him in the middle of the night? The next morning, the boy had already arrived at the store, and was thinking that waking up at such a time was quite difficult. And the grandmother, it turns out, was already here. She warned the main character not to relax because today he will have a lot of work waiting for him. And he is not one of those guys who is afraid of difficulties. Where should he start? And then the grandmother decided to give him the most important task that there is in this place. Namely, he will have to deal with the whole of this store. For now, he's just standing there in shock and can't understand what the hell she's even talking about, but Grandma asked him to just follow her. Now he can go behind this curtain. In reality, of course, he agrees, but he thinks to himself why the hell the door was hidden here all the time. He walked into the room but did not receive an answer to the question of what he needed to do, but his grandmother said that soon he would be able to understand everything himself. All this was too strange and completely different from an ordinary store. He wanted to ask his grandmother for help, but she said that his grandfather had left a note there. Let him read it and find out everything. Why the hell does he now have to read some instructions? But, oh well, I wonder what grandfather decided to write there as a farewell. And while the boy was there reading the instructions, the grandmother decided that it was time to change the sign that the store had reopened. And the grandfather turns out to be some kind of shaman. He talks about energy, and that there were too many girls in the village, so it had to be suppressed periodically. Grandfather at that time was already too old and weak, and for this reason he simply could not perform the rituals. So he wrote this note for the person who would come in his place. In short, here is a village in which there were absolutely no guys, and he is a guy. In the store there is a special place with the help of which you need to get rid of other energy. Of course, the main character was completely horrified after hearing all this horror. In short, this is the very place in the store my grandfather wrote that a special ceremony needs to be performed there with the help of a magic staff. After which he feels real horror. The instructions were completely finished. Firstly, why the hell does his grandfather end up being some kind of shaman of magicians? And secondly, why the hell should he now carry out these damn rituals? He doesn't need to carry out the ritual alone, and that's why he is given a partner. He even became interested to see who it would be. What the hell? This is the same crazy girl who always came to his grandmother to buy beer, and this is his partner. The lady on the other side said that she came here to get rid of that terrible energy. The main character didn't answer anything for a long time because he didn't even know what to do. Over time, she got tired of waiting. The next chapter begins with the memories of the main character who was about to ask his grandfather a question. He was simply interested in the reason why his grandfather still lived in the village and did not move to Seoul. But in response, the old man simply began to laugh. Everything was just incredibly simple because his grandfather really liked the place in which he was located. For him, this ordinary village was cooler than any city, and now our boy stands simply in horror, realizing what his grandfather meant then. Meanwhile, on the other side, the girl was already getting ready for the ceremony. So far, she did not understand the reason why no one answered her and asked for forgiveness from our guy. Maybe the ritual will not begin until she herself is ready for it. And the main character watches all this from the side and tries to understand what the hell is happening now. Will he really have to carry out this damn ritual? Remembering what happened in the morning, it is simply impossible to believe what is happening, because in the morning the girl was angry, as if right now she would send someone to the next world. But right now she was already standing and preparing for the ritual, as if this was how everything should be. It seems that this is why the grandfather was not going to move to the city. There were definitely no such adventures there. Suddenly, the same disc with old PlayStation 2 games appears, which the girl is extremely surprised by. She thought it was too strange. The disc was already in place, but why the hell was it still in the box? Although despite this, the game still looked interesting. But now the boy was simply in shock because someone decided to touch the collector's edition of his games, which cost a lot of money. At that very second, he simply finds himself on the floor from fear, and the girl on the other side asked if everything was okay with him. Of course, this was a shock for him, because for the last 30 years, all he had done was look for new ways to make money. And then such a sharp turn of events. For the first time in a long time, he understood what happiness was. His mind was simply screaming at him that he shouldn't play video games with strangers, and he had to quickly go to his grandmother to find out about everything. But it seems that curiosity got the better of him. Of course, he's not going to ask his grandmother anything. Now he's just going to calmly carry out the ceremony. Suddenly, the disc appears again, and this time it was already without a box. It seems the main character decided to show off the collector's edition of the games. Of course, she was simply shocked. Usually girls in the village didn't play games, but here the guy immediately brought such cool games with him. The girl was just trying to understand how many years she had not seen a real disc from the console. As soon as she thought about how she would play Mortal Kombat, she immediately wanted to start the game as soon as possible. After which we are shown the story of this girl. It turns out that at the age of 20, she went to Seoul and managed to play the console many times. She had a child there and returned. Returning back to her native village, the girl did nothing but work and therefore could not play the console as before. And finally, the moment has come when she can play her favorite games again. Great it was, because she really plays Mortal Kombat for her favorite characters and is simply not going to stop playing. The main character acted as her opponent in the game, and it seems that he hasn't played games on the console for 30 years, and this, in his opinion, turns out to be very cool when there is an opponent like her. Still, he turns out to be a cooler player. The main character played so cool that it seemed to her that she would never be able to defeat him. This is roughly what this whole picture looks like from the outside. The boy definitely didn't expect such a turn of events. And she decided to fight to the last so as not to lose to him. Of course, he wasn't such a great player either. He just learned a couple of combos and tried to play with them. I wonder what will happen next. Still, he decides to use a secret technique that he knew, and now the girl suffered critical damage. He won the first round. It was simply incredible how this was even possible. From the excitement that she would lose again, the girl simply could not breathe. Why the hell did his combination still not stop, despite the fact that the life bar had already ended, as he does it? Damn it. She just took all the damage that was there and died. Now she was worried that the main character would think that she didn't know how to play at all. It seems that the guy himself was simply in shock that he could do such combos. What the hell, because he didn't even train. In fact, the boy was very worried that he would not be able to repeat his perfect combo a second time. But when the opponents appeared on the field again, he was already ready to start the second round. The girl was also not entirely sure that he could cope, but all expectations were justified. In fact, she thought that it was simply incredible that the main character managed to defeat her, even though this wall separated them. But nothing from this made it only more interesting to play the console. Meanwhile, our boy just stands there and tries to find out her next step. She definitely won't use the same tactics as last time. What the hell? This girl chose a character who deals damage to himself, and at the same time becomes stronger. It seems that he has never fought against such a thing. And now the boy fully understood what a real opponent is. It seems that he has never fought against such people, or rather, he has never really played against real players. To say that it was just incredibly strange is to say nothing, because he was already playing as seriously as possible. It was just difficult to play when such a killing machine was against you. Meanwhile, the girl seemed to be in some kind of flow and didn't even listen to what he was saying. She just played the console and carried out attacks. The situation, of course, is simply terrible. The girl played like a pro and the main character did not know what to oppose him. It was impossible to accumulate any more strength. Right now, he needed to use his super attack to definitely defeat her. At this rate, her entire health bar should have dropped to 0, but what could happen from that? And now her strength is starting to run out. She stands and tries to do at least something, but she spent everything on her combinations. The boy decided to start carrying out the ultra attack gradually, so as not to immediately send her to the next world, so that the health bar begins to decrease. And in the next frame, we are shown how this damn girl just sits, realizing that she has been defeated, and what is she going to do now? Meanwhile, he just sat and thought about the fact that at this moment, his work could be considered a failure. Grandma, meanwhile, just sat calmly and drank tea while the main character worked for the entire store. It was that moment that became the first time he played the console and the first time he worked in his grandfather's store. Next, we are shown the same girl who came to her grandmother and said that they had finished playing the console. She just wanted to ask if she liked playing the console with her grandson, but she clearly didn't like this question. "Are you serious, Grandma?" In short, at this moment the girl is about to leave and the grandmother asked that she definitely come again. The main character has already returned back and came to his grandmother to ask what the hell that just happened. The grandmother was surprised at first and asked how his job was, but he immediately started yelling at her. How could she even hire her grandson to do such a terrible job? Why the hell did Grandpa have such a place in the store where you can play Mortal Kombat? But in response, Grandma only said that judging by the expression on the protagonist's face, everything went fine. Then he already becomes embarrassed and he says that everything went quite normally. She still admits her guilt because she pushed him into this room without even telling him anything about the work, but only he was the grandson of his grandfather, which is why the grandmother was sure that he could cope. He wanted even less to believe that his dad and uncle also worked in this place. In response, his grandmother simply laughed and said that of course they didn't work here. Be that as it may, he came here to help her manage the store and not play video games here, but Grandma said that this is exactly what help with the store is. It's just that the main character still doesn't know too many things about this village. If suddenly he doesn't release this energy, then soon it will begin to accumulate, and in such cases simply terrible things will begin to happen. That console game turned out to be the most ancient ritual that their ancestors came up with, and the main character is now the only person who can save their village from simply terrible things. And then the guy just looked shocked on his face, because he thought that his grandmother had also been playing this damn console since ancient times. And now the granny feels embarrassed. It seems that the main character was right when he talked about the game on the console. She simply said that the main character should quickly shut his mouth. There is a book in which the grandfather told about everything he needed to know, so let him read it more carefully. For today, he did a great job, so let him drop everything he was doing in the store and go rest. Now the boy was simply sitting in his room and trying to understand the reason why his grandfather decided to do such strange things in the store. Although most likely this store was originally created precisely for such purposes, and even his father and uncle did not know about its existence. Be that as it may, now the guy had a real goal in life. He wanted to know this terrible secret that was hiding in this store, and the reason why his grandfather decided to do something like this. In ancient times, two energies that only boys and girls possessed were considered the most important, but in this village it was the female power that was considered the strongest. It is for this reason that men had to be invited from far away. After the war ended, he also decided to come to that village only because he was told that they would be given food there. Then other men from all provinces of Korea came with him. It was then that he met a beautiful girl who later became his wife. It was with her that he played Mortal Kombat. In short, it was the story of how his grandfather ended up here. Afterwards, the main character simply closes the book that describes the whole story of his grandfather, but the boy immediately closes this book, saying that he is not going to read how he and his grandmother played Mortal Kombat. But you still had to read it. Then the main character still decides to skip all the unnecessary stuff and go straight to the essence of the story. Then the rules of the store were written there. The first was that the room in which the console was located had to be separate so that no one knew about it. And the second was that you could only come to play once a day. It also turns out that the age difference between the opponents should not exceed 12 years. Well, at least he won't have to fight against grandmothers, although this pleases the main character. Wait, why the hell is the guy sitting now and thinking about how to play a console? He's actually universal scale here and not playing the fool. What was much more important was that, whether dad and uncle knew about it, it seemed he had found the right page. Afterwards, we are shown a grandfather who has already grown old. He perfectly understood that soon, he would no longer be able to play the console as in his youth, which is why he is going to hand over the business in the store to his sons. His eldest son was incredibly smart, so he wanted to make him heir, but he clearly did not intend to stay here and wanted to return to Seoul. About his second son, he said that he was too energetic and immediately asked him not to worry. He promised to stay here to grow a huge garden and help his father so that he could rely on him. But there was a completely different problem, because he was clearly too small to play the console. Meanwhile, at the table, the husband and wife asked the main character why he was behaving so strangely. During all this time, he did not even look at the food and was simply minding his own business. Still, he comes to his senses and says that he doesn't think about anything at all, but in fact he thought that his uncle was not made heir only because he did not know how to play the console. He had heard that the main character had already worked in the store today, and he wondered what it was like. His grandmother said that he had done a great job. In response, he simply laughed awkwardly, and then said that it turned out to be much easier than he might have thought. The uncle began to praise him, saying that this was just great news, but the girl began to look at him strangely. But the next day, we were again shown a grandmother who put up a notice that the store was closed again. As a result, today the main character decided not to go to the store and simply stayed in his room. After all, he came here to recuperate after another failure, and not to get a job where he constantly had to play video games. It was, of course, incredibly cool that he had such an opportunity to play a console game with a real person. But he hadn't played with anyone for 30 years, and he couldn't even imagine that everything would happen exactly like this. He was only thinking about the fact that from the very beginning he had to return back to the city, when suddenly his thoughts were interrupted by a request to enter the room. It turns out that this is the aunt who heard that he decided not to go to work in his store today. He decided to simply say that some circumstances had arisen, but now his aunt was wondering what was wrong. He turned away from her and said that he couldn't tell her everything, and she continued to look at him strangely. After which the girl suggested that they take a little walk together, which extremely surprised the main character. Next, the actions are transferred to the walk itself. The girl believed that for a long time it had become much better here. They built a factory and a couple of other enterprises, and the guy was just trying to understand why he was called here. She continued the story by saying that before it was impossible to even send a letter from here, but now everything here has become newer. Then the girl decided to clarify, because the main character came here only because his business did not bring any results. He simply confirmed his words. The girl repeated saying that her uncle told her that the main character worked from a very young age, but from then on, everything remained exactly the same as it was. She decided to ask maybe he had some kind of dream, and he began his story about how, from an early age, he took on any job that could bring in money. Although in the end, not everything worked out exactly as he would have liked. After which the girl simply said that it is completely normal when a person dreams of big money, and this is probably where our video ends for today. Thanks for watching, subscribe to the channel, and like, so that the new part comes out as soon as possible.